So what I wanted to do is I just wanted to run through our company presentation with all of you, because some of you won't have seen me do it before in person, and then we can talk about any aspects that anyone wants to talk about. This is available on our website as well if you go to the Investor Relations section. Obviously, there's some important information which I'd ask you to go and read on the one online to save everyone going through that now. So the format for the presentation is just to talk a little bit about the company. Being shareholders, most of you will be pretty familiar with that, and then to talk about the three parts to the group which we announced within our 10-year plan very shortly after we listed, and then to go through a few company metrics. So I set up the Smarter Web company in 2009. Set it up in Bristol, which is why we decided to have the meeting here today. As a child, I grew up with pictures of Concorde on the wall, and I remember Concorde flying over my old office when I was at Hargreaves Lansdown on its final flight. And I live about 15 minutes away from here, so I thought it was quite nice to have the meeting at somewhere as important to me and most other people in the UK as this. That was 15, 16 years ago. And for the first 15-ish years of the company's life, it was a web design business. Alex, who is very kindly filming the presentation today, Alex and myself, we've worked really hard for our wonderful clients, and we've got approximately 250 of them who rely on us for their website, and we're very, very proud of that. But a few years ago, we actually, until recently, we were saying 2023, but as part of a legal stream of work that we're doing at the moment, we actually realized that it was 2022 that we started accepting payment as Bitcoin. And round about that time, I started to think that it would be great if there was a company in the UK that I could invest in that was similar to Strategy, then called MicroStrategy. And as many of you will know, I struggled to find one. So round about this time last year, I'd had enough of waiting. So I decided that I would list my business on the stock market, a technology business, a web design company, a CMS company, whatever you want to call it, and then pursue the future business from there. So we listed on the AQUIS exchange in the UK in April 2025, which is approximately the same time that we formally adopted a Bitcoin treasury, and that was about 7 months ago now. And over that time period, as is shown by many of you making the effort to travel today, we've had incredible retail investor support, and the institutional support that we've been working on is slowly but surely getting somewhere, and we're quite optimistic about that for the future. I'm really proud of what we've done so far. Clearly the first 2 months, sort of pleased almost everyone. The last 4 or 5 months have been harder, for shareholders, dependent on when you became a shareholder, of course. As my wife says, the share price is just one metric, because in my opinion, if you look at the developments that we've had just over the last couple of months, the company's looking stronger and stronger every single week with the team and so forth that we've put together. But we are the best performing UK IPO of the last 20 years. I still think that we're the best performing UK IPO ever, but the data clearly says 20 years. We're the largest stock on the access segment of the AQUIS market, and at our peak, local peak, I hasten to add, of the share price, we were the only company ever to surpass a £1 billion market cap on AQUIS, which was quite good. We're an incredibly liquid stock. If you compare us, add the whole AQUIS market together, we equate to over 60% of the volume on it. If you add the London Stock Exchange and AQUIS stocks all together, we're either just within the top 100 or just outside of it, dependent on which week you look at it. So we're incredibly liquid, which is very, very good. We're also liquid on our other markets, where we've got a cross listing in Germany and we've got the OTC listing in the US. And brilliantly, we're the largest UK public company holding Bitcoin on our balance sheet. We always say that we're larger than all of the other UK ones added together. And that's still true, and I hope it will always be true. So we're really proud of those stats, and we wouldn't have those stats without all of you. So our 10-year plan. This is something that we announced just after we listed. It's all very, very clear in the AQUIS admission document, which is something that you have to produce before you list. And it's something that we talk about a bit. And I just wanted to walk through each of the different bits so that you all had a bit more understanding of how I see that and why I think that makes us, a company that's well positioned for the future. So our core business, the Smarter Web Company, the web design business, is something that is pretty profitable, actually, when you look at it for the work that goes into it in terms of human inputs. So we're taking steps, and we've taken some steps already since listing to try and expand that side of the business, because I think one of the things that everyone can see over more recent developments in this new emerging sector of Bitcoin treasury companies is that an operating business, a profitable operating business, has got a lot of merits when the market isn't so good. That's something that in the first month or two of our life as a listed company, nobody wanted to know about, but particularly on the institutional investor side of things, I notice a lot more conversations on that. Easily over 50% of the institutions that I speak to are quite interested in what we do from an operating business point of view. And that wouldn't be possible without Alex, of course, because I don't tend to do too much of it anymore, sadly. The idea behind this is that we can use our Bitcoin treasury to grow that side of the business, and we do that through the increased visibility that we've got. So some of you will have seen that the mainstream media have started to become a bit more receptive towards Bitcoin and public companies adopting Bitcoin. And that's really important, because that isn't just about telling our Bitcoin treasury story. That's also about telling the wider business story. And then longer term, away from the fact that we've been accepting Bitcoin as a business since 2022, we also see that we can add some value back into the Bitcoin community there, which we will progress as we go. For example, we donated or gave without charge is probably the correct way of putting it, the website to the BSCF conference that I went to in September, which is organised by a lovely guy called Gary Smith, and he does a great job of at a grassroots level of trying to do his bit for the Bitcoin community in the UK. So from a business point of view, cash flow, profitability, all those sorts of metrics, the operating business is very, very sensible, but also giving back in the non-traditional way is quite nice there. So our acquisition strategy to talk about next, and there are some more slides that we'll go through on this side of things, at a high level is exactly a way of growing the core business to make it more profitable. But I'll come on to that in a minute with the slides that I've got for that. And then finally, the Bitcoin treasury side of things, we'll talk about that when we get onto those slides as well. But it's important to look at these three elements together. You might not care about one or two of them, but I would urge you to all look at the whole company and consider whether that's got the right mix of everything, and if not, as everyone knows, I'm always happy to chat. You can reach out, phone the office, whatever. I'm more than happy to listen. We can constantly debate these things as a team. So the good thing about the core business of the Smarter Web Company is it's very, very scalable. And in my opinion, one of the best bits about it is that there's a recurring revenue here. So effectively what we're doing is we're giving somebody a very good quality service. We think that it's better than they can get from a lot of alternatives. Great level of customer support, which is really, really important. And from our side of things, from the business's side of things, because they pay a small amount of money for effectively the hosting of their website, and then additional amounts if they want support done on top of that, it generates a pretty good reoccurring revenue stream, which, when I decided to set up the Smarter Web Company, I always remember Peter Hargreaves telling us all of this story about the benefit of the recurring revenue to Hargreaves Lansdown. And obviously on a minute scale, the Smarter Web Company imitates that. The other thing that I'm quite excited about for the future is we've got these different products that we offer, Lite, Pro, Ready-Made. There's one or two other ones. They're just different packages. So if somebody needs a website, we've got these different solutions. So we've tried to sort of compartmentalize the product selection part of it to make it easier for people, because we deliver all of this stuff remotely as well. But one of those products, which we've only offered for about a year, I think it is, the Ready-Made service is incredibly high margin relative to the other things. So it serves a great need in terms of people having a decent website, but without the bespoke aspect of it. But from our side of things, it's better, if that's the right word, than the other things. So the acquisition strategy, which I wanted to talk about with you all today, I think maybe there's a little bit of confusion about what this means at times. We've worked relatively hard since we've IPO'd to try and find the right acquisition opportunity, which will then be opportunities. But I've got some quite rigid criteria that I will not deviate from this. So the whole concept here is that we've got a balance sheet that is being built on the very best asset in the world, Bitcoin. And as that balance sheet gets bigger and bigger and bigger, we can use that balance sheet to grow our core business in order to make the whole business better, and so on and so forth. So, that doesn't mean to say that we will sell the Bitcoin for acquiring a business. We don't need to do that. By having the value in the balance sheet, if we find the right opportunities, we can use a mixture of equity and cash to acquire other businesses. So clearly, I can only talk about where we are at the moment, but we've looked at different acquisitions, and when we find the correct acquisitions that we can follow, that we've got conviction in, then we'll be able to talk about that further. Before we move on from that, I just wanted to explain how I see that working, so that everyone had what's in my head on that. And if we use a fictitious example here, you may find a business that could contribute to our cash flows, that you could acquire for a modest amount, that you can buy with a mixture of equity and cash. So the equity would effectively be a dilution to existing shareholders, which is why the price that you acquire the business for is so important. So I believe, and obviously, this year, as we're standing here today, isn't a very good example of that, is on average, Bitcoin will probably do something like 30% a year for the foreseeable future. So to me, I wouldn't want to buy a business that is going to pay me back in more than 4 years, because Bitcoin will serve that purpose very, very nicely, ignoring the business diversification and the cash flow element of that, of course. But what you can do for the cash element of a business is, if you buy the right businesses, you can fund the cash out of the future cash flows of the business that you acquire. So going back to, you buy a business, let's say for £1 million, and you buy it for 50% in equity and 50% in cash split over a number of years. The 50% equity is a dilution to shareholders. There's no getting away from that. But as long as you do it alongside your treasury operations, you can still generate a yield, but you're also generating potential cash flow if you get the right business, of course. But the cash payments can be paid out over the long term. But there's another benefit that probably most people are missing, which is the human capital side of things. So I've worked really hard to build out our team, some of which are with us today, and all of which will be with us at the AGM, which we'll probably hold at this same venue early next year, which we'll announce in due course. But it's hard finding good people, really hard. Whereas the human capital of acquiring the right businesses for the wider group is actually more exciting than most people would realise. So we'll take our time on that. We've said to everyone that we'll only do the right opportunity at the right time. I've got pretty high standards, but I think that is something that deserved a few minutes of the presentation today. Bitcoin Treasury, what many of you are quite interested in. So as I say constantly, we believe that Bitcoin is the best asset the world has ever seen. I know it's been a difficult couple of weeks maybe for those that are newer to the Bitcoin space. I have almost 100% of everything that I own in Bitcoin and Bitcoin treasury companies, and I genuinely believe that it's the only asset that's worth holding. I think my son has a tiny amount of NVIDIA, but other than that, it's all Bitcoin and Bitcoin treasury companies. Why do I think it's so great? Well, it's very, very simple. It comes down to the fixed supply. And in my opinion, we'll see the benefits of that unfolding from now with what's happening in the US and so forth, because a big amount of Bitcoin is the global liquidity. What we believe, and this is why we've structured the business in this whole way, is that Bitcoin is digital capital. So that's what we mean when we say that we're building the balance sheet on digital capital. So as I said earlier, that doesn't mean to say that you sell the digital capital, but you use the digital capital. If you compare our company with a very strong balance sheet, no debt, growing without giving a projection, cash flows, over time, just to make that very clear. You can see that we're in a far superior place, in my opinion, to most other public companies that have got debt. Like, what do we tell our kids, or what do I tell my kids? I tell them that debt is bad, and we've tried to sort of develop the business in the same way, but that doesn't mean to say that longer term we might not have an element of debt. But even though a lot of people think I'm sort of quite sort of adventurous on the risk curve because I believe in Bitcoin, I would say that I'm a lot less risky than most people, because I don't believe in debt to any large amount. But clearly, as we grow and grow and grow as a company, we'll explore that as we go. And the great thing about what we've been able to do is that we've been able to use the public markets, to implement this strategy. As you all know, the last couple of months have been slightly harder to raise capital than the earlier months, and we believe this will be like a wave, and there'll be times when it's much easier and times when it's harder. But there are different tools that me and the team are constantly evaluating. So that's, debts, preferreds, things like this. But, these are medium to long-term goals that we're looking at. The focus at the moment is exactly what you're all familiar with, and I think that's really, really important. I think what you can see at the moment in the UK is that, or globally actually, is you can see the importance that the companies that have got the right structure, the right capital structure, can take their time to make the right decisions. The slide on the right is something that you're all familiar with. That's just for when we're speaking to the institutional shareholders, so they can understand how the equity raise against positive MNAV works. So when we IPO'd the business, it was quite hard to get it away initially, and then as soon as I could start speaking to people like yourselves, that's when it really started. The first week or so as a public company, the retail investors that we gave access to the IPO, really got behind us, and clearly they probably all thought the same as me. But the point of this slide is to show people like the institutional investors or the regulators and things that what they've seen this year isn't anything to be too surprised about. We've seen this, providing the companies structure things in the right way. We've seen this reaction that we've seen this year, in other markets, and no doubt we'll see it again when it's done in the right way as well. And then where are we going with this? So I was really pleased to see a podcast with one of the guys at Strategy, talking about us again last week, and most of the people running the good Bitcoin treasury companies across the globe, most of which I'm friends with, feel the same. So what we all think is that there'll be a dominant player in every market, and then there'll be many, many, many other players in that market as well, doing different things in different ways, and that's okay as well. But we believe that there's a big advantage in being the first mover in a particular market, and by having the right capital structure, the right shareholder communication strategy, and all the rest of it. And I think that up until now, you can see the results of that with what we've done, and we'll really try and maintain that lead as we move into 2026 with the various different things that we're working on. One of the questions that I get asked quite a lot is, would we explore acquisitions of the companies that might not be doing so well in the same or a different market? And we've looked at some of those as well. But a lot of those are much harder than you would think. There's a lot of complications there, and ultimately, if it's cheaper to buy Bitcoin, then you would do that. I think that might change, maybe in the future. But if you think about it, if you've got a large premium on your MNAV, which clearly we don't right now, but we expect we'll have in the future, the chances are that the companies that aren't doing so well will come back in as well, and then they would be trading above their Bitcoin. So trying to time those acquisitions up is a lot harder than you would think. I think maybe what you'll see in the future is maybe more like mergers or strategic partnerships with large players in one country that might want to get into a different market and realize that the barriers make it harder, and then do sort of JVs and things like that. That's my current thinking of how that one might play out. A couple of ones on the performance to date. So these are all fully diluted figures, which is why when you look at the enterprise value, which is crudely speaking the same as a market cap, it goes higher than it really did because it's the fully diluted nature of it. And then you can obviously see that as the share price has declined since June, July, whenever that was, the number of Bitcoin that we've held and actually the Bitcoin per share growth that we've delivered has gone the other way. So I think it's important to view the two things side by side, because if you think in Bitcoin terms, you don't look at the share price, So you think about the Bitcoin per share, but I accept that most people look at it in terms of the share price, which is why we've been working almost every hour that God sends, to try and keep pushing things forward, and why I believe in transparency as well. I love writing the weekly update that we put out on a Saturday morning. It takes quite a lot of time to write it. I write it on the Friday. I've normally finished it by about 9 o'clock at night, and then I spend about an hour editing it on a Saturday morning as well before I put it out. So, I love doing that because I think that your right as a shareholder is to get that information as much as we can, issue the information in line with what we're allowed to say. And this is my point on the sats per share, which is, Bitcoin per share. You can see that has increased. Admittedly, over the last quarter, it has plateaued a little bit, but it's still positive. If you look at the quarterly yield figures, which is another one of the things that I look at a lot for all the different companies globally, you can see that we're one of the only companies in the world to deliver a Bitcoin yield above zero in this current quarter. And we're one of the best by that metric as well. And then our NAV, Jesse updated all these figures for us yesterday, so they're bang up to date. Obviously, the NAV drops when Bitcoin comes down, in my opinion, only temporary. But none of us can predict the short-term direction of Bitcoin, and we probably shouldn't try. And then finally, it's the MNAV one, which if there's one thing that's a little bit upsetting at the moment is the sort of the negative MNAV, because I focus my energies on what I can control, which is pushing the company forward. But I do feel that the market is being a little bit unfair to us there, but it is what it is. And then finally, to come across some of the people in the team that you'll know. Obviously, you've got Laura and Alex here, which are absolutely critical to everything that we do. But there's a whole team of people here, and well, not everyone, a lot of people think that it's mostly me and Jesse, but there are others. So, obviously you've got myself. Jesse is absolutely fantastic. He does a lot of things behind the scenes that you will never see. Subject to what he feels is right for his family next year. He may even move to the UK. I had another chat with him about that yesterday, and I made it very, very clear that there's absolutely zero pressure for me on that. We don't mind where he works, but if he wants to come to the UK, that's cool as well. And then Tyler runs a company called BTC Inc., the host of the Bitcoin conference. Tyler is incredibly useful from a strategy point of view, and is another member of the team that many of you won't know so well. And then we've got others. We recently announced Randall, one of our non-executive directors. He's the senior non-executive director of a company called Games Workshop. That's a really successful UK company. Many of you will remember it from your childhoods, no doubt. And they've survived through thick and thin in different economic climates, with a presence on the high street and an incredibly loyal fan base. I think they've got a deal with Amazon as well, which is going to sort of modernize their content, I suppose. Randall's amazing. We're so lucky because 6 months ago we wouldn't have been able to recruit someone of that pedigree. We've also got Albert, the CFO. Again, somebody that 6 months ago, when we were so much smaller, we wouldn't have been able to recruit someone with that pedigree either. I rely very heavily on them, for certain functions, and as shareholders, you should sort of, just remember that there's a whole bunch of people there, and then of course Sean couldn't be with us today because he's doing something else out of the country for one of his other commitments, but Sean's been great so far as our non-executive chairman, and I think that's the whole team, unless I've forgotten someone, the current team. And that's it. There are some appendices on this presentation if you want to go and look at it on our website. This is the slide that Jesse doesn't always get credited for. He invented this slide. This is the slide that Strategy's model is largely based on. And you can see how small Bitcoin is. You know, the thing that we say all the time, you know, we're still early. If this slide doesn't say it, I don't know what else does. Gold's had a good move this year. If you view Bitcoin priced in gold, we've got a lot of catching up to do. But you can see how tiny Bitcoin is relative to the other assets that you've got there. And then Bitcoin as the best performing asset in the world, you know, in a month or so's time, well, just under a month now, we'll see whether we get another down year. 3 down years. If this year is a down year, so be it. But the performance of Bitcoin is incredible if you look at it over the long term. Many of you will have heard me talk about the concept of compound Bitcoin, which is how I justify the benefit of a Bitcoin treasury company. If you're teaching anyone about compound returns, you know, I don't see how you can do that without thinking about Bitcoin. So yeah, two appendices that you may want to look at. And then on that note, if we go on to any questions that anyone may have.